Welcome back to the Super Bowl edition of our PFRPA podcast. I'm here with an old friend, Ron Mix. Ron, how you doing?
Doing fine, thank you, Brian.
Exciting to be here at the Super Bowl.
Oh yeah, I mean you have to attend the Super Bowl to really understand the electricity in the air. I mean, it's actual electricity in the air. When you go to the game, it's like no game you've ever seen before. The NFL has done such a fantastic job of making it a special event.
Yeah, the entire city is decked out in Super Bowl everything, and there's so much going on across the city, from the Super Bowl experience to concerts and events. It's like really a week-long Super Bowl festival.
Yeah, and they've got a great band of volunteers who are saying kind things to you and welcome you at from the airport on.
I was impressed. I was impressed by that yesterday in town. Greeters at every corner, just about. It was crazy. Just welcome you to Atlanta. So great job, Atlanta. Way to put on a Super Bowl. So back in your day, playing with the Chargers, not necessarily a Super Bowl game, but a championship nonetheless. It was 1963.
That's correct.
New England Patriots.
That's correct.
See if my memory holds together. So the Chargers beat the New England Patriots, 1963 AFL championship game, 51-10.
It was 51-10,
There we go.
It was just an unbelievable performance by the coaching staff, by everybody. You know, there comes a time sometimes when kind of magic happens, and every player plays at the absolute top of their game. And that happened then. We had two great running backs, Keith Lincoln and Paul Lowe. We had a outstanding quarterback shared by Tobin Rote and John Hadel. We had two great defensive linemen, Earl Faison and Ernie Ladd. Ernie Ladd was 6'9", 340 pounds.
Wow.
His eyes looked like they weighed a pound each, and a great athlete. I mean, Earl and Ernie, here's the quality of players they were. For a 4-year period of time, they played their positions as well as anybody ever played, and I mean including current day. And if it wasn't for injuries, they'd be Hall of Fame players. And Paul Lowe and Keith Lincoln, they were all-stars. But the problem was, in those days, you had usually 3 running backs. You had a quarterback. We had a great wide receiver named Lance Allworth. He's in the Pro Football Hall of Fame. And the ball was distributed to everybody. And if Keith and Paul, if either of them had even, say, 5 more touches a game, they'd be Hall of Fame players. But anyway, we were outstanding, and we were brilliant that day.
Let's talk about that.
But I must point out something. Bill Belichick was not the coach of New England at that time, so I don't know how much that counts.
Oh, and we'll get to that in a minute. I mean, because this Patriots team, obviously something ridiculously special. But let's go back and talk about. I want to let fans in on what it's like to play in a game of that magnitude. It's the championship game. It is the biggest show on earth, right? Tell me about what it felt like going into the game as a player.
You know, this is crazy, and this story, what I'm about to tell you, has never been told. And but you understand that most people think that you really got to focus and concentrate on a game to be outstanding, and I'm not sure that's true. I think you just have to have it within yourself that you understand you have a job to do, and whether it's in practice or in a game, you're supposed to perform it the best you can. And so here's what happened during that week. It was controversy the entire week, and the reason, in fact, we threatened to boycott the game. The Chargers threatened to boycott the game, and the reason was the amount of money that you received per player for the game was very modest. And it was based on the attendance. And so for the first time, the league decided they were going to televise the championship game in the city also where it was being played. And we felt that would cut down on the attendance, and which would make our cut even smaller. By the way, in those days, the cuts were like $1,200 to the winner, and like $800 to the loser. And that was important money. It was important money because none of us made very much. We had defensive backs making as little as $5,000 a year.
Wow.
Not a game,
wow.
a year. And any event, so we wanted the league to guarantee a certain amount of attendance no matter what. The stadium only held 33,000, and I think we wanted to guarantee 31,000 no matter what. And finally, they agreed to do it. But we were I was talking to Tommy Addison. He was the captain of the Boston team, the New England team. And we were all somewhat on board of doing something about that. And so the whole week is mirrored in controversy. The coaches are mad at us as can be. I mean, our own coaches are mad at us. And yet we go out and explode in a great, great game.
Obviously, you don't want your team to be distracted during the week, so it's impressive that y'all came together at both sides, both teams, right, with all that kind of controversy. And it's an interesting thing to see because, I mean, it is 1963, and I'm talking about televising the championship game in the community, right? So
correct.
I wonder if it's like it is nowadays, obviously, assuming maybe not every household had a TV in 1963 still. Right? It could have been. It's been interesting to see how they played that out. Obviously, the NFL would never do that today, right?
Now, Brian, wait a minute. Brian, you're acting like we just invented the wheel in the 60s. I mean,
come on. TVs hit what, in 49?
Every
house had 63?
Probably most TVs were black and white, but most
right.
homes had TVs.
I remember stories from my parents. That's where it comes to me of not having a television when they were kids. It was probably because they're stone broke, right?
Yeah.
Stone broke. So, anyways, let's go back to you personally. Let's talk about here we are just a few days before the Super Bowl. What's going through a player's mind? You're 3 or 4 days out from the big game. What is it like?
Well, you know what's interesting about it is one thing that you come to know is that no matter how good you've been throughout the year, your team, no matter how well it's played, your legacy is not created unless you win the championship. Nobody cares about it. I mean, it must be only in America where you can't be second best.
Right.
I mean, it's just crazy. The second best team in the history of football, for instance, like who cares? They weren't the first best. I guess that's one of the things, that's this ambitious attitude we have as Americans and the striving for greatness. I guess that's one of the things that makes us a great country. But it's permeated down into sports. And if you're not you're just thinking that you've absolutely got to win to prove it. It's just like I know when you were playing and when I was playing, you wanted to play against the very best opposition players that existed, because to yourself that proved to you that you could do it.
Yeah, absolutely. It brings to mind the Jim Kelly era Buffalo Bills, right? I mean,
sure.
Here you have one of the greatest dynasties in football during that time. I mean, where they had 4 Super Bowl appearances, right?
In a row.
Yeah, but they lost.
They lost.
And what a difference that would have been for the legacy of all of those players if they had won those games, or at least the majority of them. Right?
Oh, absolutely. Like, for instance, now whenever they introduce a player, say from either currently or in the past, and if that player has been on the Super Bowl team, that's the first thing the media will say, or the sports announcer will say, and he was a Super Bowl champion and blah 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 and everything like that, and for instance, in the public, it's got the public's mindset too. For instance, if I'm out in public and I'm wearing this great Hall of Fame ring, can you see it? This monster
can we see it?
that screams out,
right?
Look at me!
Yeah,
I'm in the Pro Football Hall of Fame.
Yeah.
But in any event, if I wear it, I don't wear it often because of
right.
because
you might get beat down somewhere.
People will know
they'll
they'll just start a conversation about it, but when I wear it, people will ask, was that a Super Bowl ring? And I'm such a jerk. I'll point out, there's 5,000 Super Bowl rings. This is the Pro Football Hall of Fame ring. There's only 200 of them.
It's exactly what you said to me the first time I asked. Is that a Super Bowl ring?
Exactly.
Oh my gosh, that's funny.
But it's but actually it's kind of neat for the guys. Every player who's ever made it into a pro football training camp, if good enough to get into training camp, was a great player.
Yeah.
Was a great player. The fact that they may have a long career in the NFL doesn't diminish that at all.
And it's you're exactly right. The weight that we put on certain things, like we know that if you played on a team, that just the fact that you played in the NFL, whether it was a single down or it was for years, that NFL shield goes with you wherever you go, right? It's how you're announced to people. It's how folks introduce you all these years later. Hey, he was an NFL player. Hey, this is Ron Mix. He's an NFL player, Hall of Famer. Those things and every accolade along the way just stick with you. And I think we know that too as players, right?
That's absolutely.
Big games like this, how much they matter and how it will just little ways that will impact the rest of your life. It's and you almost going back to think this is the biggest game in football, and not wanting to take away anything from the greatness of the players from the Rams, or the losing team. I just was guessing the Rams were going to lose. I just put it out there, right? Even though they're going to lose this game. No, it's just those special points in time that go with you, like being a Hall of Famer, like being a Super Bowl champion. Those tags just stay with you forever. So,
I got to tell you a cute story. You reminded me of it. I don't know why, but about identity of teams, for instance. And now I played for the Chargers for 10 years and the Oakland Raiders for 2 years. And the mystique of the Raider team is such that this is a common event. If somebody introduces me, like you point out, they'll say, "This is Ron Mix. You might be interested to know he played professional football." And the person will say, "Oh, who'd you play for?" And I say, "Well, I played for the Chargers for 10 years and the Raiders for 2 years." Invariably, they say, "The Raiders, wow."
Yeah. It was one of those teams that I'd always hoped to play for, honestly, because I know it carries that with it, right? It's the Raiders.
Oh, yeah. I mean, their owner, Al Davis, he was my position coach when I was at the University of Southern California. Then at the same time I joined the Chargers, he joined the Chargers as an assistant coach. And we had remained friends, but he is one of the great owners in the history of the game, and he was a player's best friend. He really was. He treated them equally with respect. He didn't try to beat you down during contract negotiations. He'd start off with a number that was very fair. And here's something very few members of the public know about, but there was never a time, like after I retired, when I went to Al and told him about some former player that needed financial help, was in a problem, that Al didn't automatically come through. Never.
Wow, that's huge. Yeah, that's a big deal.
He hired, and to put one other point, he'd hire more former of his players to the front office, to coaching, to scouting than I bet any other three owners anywhere combined.
That's interesting. I mean, that's something I really want to look into. I mean, obviously being a part of the PFRPA and the transition period that we always talk about. That's so difficult. It's only a player's coach would see that need to pull guys back into the game, keep them attached to it in some capacity. And Al's, his legend lives on. Through some of his sayings that you just can't forget. Like, if you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. right?
Oh no, he never said that. He didn't say that.
He didn't say that?
No, that was some baseball player.
Baseball player? I thought that was an Al Davis thing.
Oh no, I never liked that saying.
Yeah, I didn't like it either.
Never liked that saying.
But Al, I think it's just his quest and his drive to win football games what made him so compelling to me. You could see it in him, and just how he talked to the players, and everything even that the media portrayed. Just that coach loved his guys, and he wanted to go win football games. That's what made him such a compelling guy to me. I always dreamed of being a part of that, right? So let's go on to the day before the big game, okay? And what does it feel like the night before? What are you going through in your mind?
You're just trying to tell yourself, just relax, because you want to get a good night's sleep.
Yeah. Did you sleep the night before the championship?
Oh yeah,
yeah,
oh yeah. But you would have to keep reminding yourself, just relax. You played against this team twice before, and just relax, and then you'd think about. Be sure to, if you felt you needed to review your playbook, you'd do that. But by then you probably didn't. But mostly it was just telling yourself to relax, and you thought about you visualized how you'd be playing. The visualization is like a very important part of football. A very important part of football, of imagining what you'd be doing on each play.
Mm-hmm. I remember the closest I ever got was the AFC Championship game. We actually lost to the Patriots. This was the 96 season, the 97 playoffs. But I remember the night before. And, we always have our test as offensive linemen. We'd have these little, scripted things for our offense, and you're drawing up the plays. Hey, where do you go on different defensive fronts? And just going through that again and again and again, and then going back and you're trying to close your eyes and visualize every snap, right? How you're blocking the guy, your head placement, hand placement, all of those details, right? That was that moment before that game. You're right. It's having to convince yourself that you've been here before, right?
Exactly.
You've played this game, and you can go do it's just another football game. Right? Trying to convince yourself.
That's what you try to convince yourself, but it's so much more.
And I can't, seeing, down yesterday during Media Row, and seeing, the whole world's media is watching this game, and here in Atlanta, I remember experiencing a piece of that at the championship games. I mean, it's not obviously to this level, but it blew me away. Especially the first time experiencing this playoff atmosphere and then getting up to the AFC Championship game. I just couldn't believe the amount of media attention when it got down to the last four teams. So what was it like? Tell me about in 1963. What was the environment like media-wise? What did it feel like as a player?
Well, of course, they're the same thing. There were requests for interviews, but not many, as typical, not many for offensive linemen.
Right.
They were really only interested in talking to the quarterbacks, the wide receivers.
Right.
And I don't blame them. I mean, who would you rather hear from, Lance Allworth or Ron Nix?
Yeah.
But it was surprising. It was surprising to see the massive media attention from all over the country, and it's nothing like today, by the way.
Yeah.
But back then, it really was huge. And and another thing about thinking about the game, one of the things you realize, because we all have a certain amount of ego about you, and you're also realistic. One of the things you realize is that if you don't win that game, you're labeled as a loser.
Right.
That's just the way it is. You're not labeled as the
crazy? Second
best team.
Yeah.
You're labeled as a loser.
It's our American culture, though.
Yeah.
Just like we were talking about earlier. I think that's part of what has made America great, right? It's just that drive to be
Absolutely.
successful, right? So let's go to game day right now, and let's briefly talk about game day. What is, in your mind, the memory that sticks out the most about that championship game in 1963?
I think again it was just that everybody on the team played at their absolute top level. You know, there's sometimes, no matter how hard you train or whatever, sometimes you just don't have it at the same level every game. But this was an instance where everybody played at their top level. I mean, it was unbelievable. Like Keith Lincoln had he's a running back. He had 327 cumulative yards, combination running and pass receiving. And Keith was a great player, but it also meant that Sid Gilman and his staff, and he had a great staff. I mean, names that you now know. Chuck Noll was on his staff.
I didn't know that.
Al Davis. Well, when Al wasn't on the staff at that time, he had left to join the Raiders. But there was a great.
Two football icons on that coaching staff.
Bum Phillips.
Oh my gosh, 3.
Bum Phillips was on the staff.
Wow.
And it was a great assistant coach also that went on to coach the Denver Broncos named Jack Faulkner. I mean, it was loaded, and they came up with a game plan that was just unbelievable. I mean, when we have an offense that runs up over 500 yards. I mean, it was 510 or 20 yards. It's just amazing in those days.
That's incredible. What a journey. So now we're going to we talked about doing this in kind of a couple parts here. So now let's kind of turn the page a little bit, and I want to talk a little about some of the more important things I want to say that you've probably done in your playing career. And especially when it comes to seeing injustice. And I think that's one of the things that has impressed me and endeared me to you most. Like just seeing that you stepped out for folks. When you saw something was wrong, you weren't hesitating to step up. And I think that's incredible. So we'll take folks into the Wayback Machine. It is America in the 1960s. It's a totally different environment. Let's talk about first the stepping out for your brothers. When you found out there was some racial inequality going on, what was happening? Tell me about the environment and what happened that day.
Well, you kind of have to understand back then it'd be hard for many of the people in modern America and many of the black athletes now to appreciate and understand what was going on at a time we lived in a segregated America. But the segregation of America didn't merely impact black people. There was a prejudice that existed that permeated all parts of the country. Prejudice against Jews, prejudice against Catholics, prejudice against Asians, anybody who was considered different by white America.
Yeah.
And then prejudice against certain white people from certain parts of the country. It was just, it was epidemic. But what's interesting is the role athletics has played in this. Athletics has always been in the forefront of changing people's mind and advancing racial and religious understanding. And my first experience of that, of really understanding the role athletics play, was at the University of Southern California, where at a major university, people come from every racial, religious, socioeconomic background, different parts of the country. And you come together and you have that common goal and you're working together and you're going through the same thing, and you come to realize that people are just really basically the same. They got the same hopes and dreams and aspirations, and hoping to better their lives, and hoping to do things for their family, and hoping to do things for their mom and dad, and they'll do better things for their kids. And so at SC in 1959, the two co-captains were myself and Willie Wood. And our teammates voted us captain at a time that 99.5% of all the fraternities would not permit either Willie or me to join them because I'm Jewish and Willie was black. And our white Christian teammates, comprised about 90% of the team, made no difference to them. They judged people by, they came to the realization of judging people by their character and their conduct, not by some preconceived, prejudicial opinions that they have. And many of them grew up with those racial biases and religious biases. Yeah. It came to them from their household. That's where people learn things. And but it didn't mean anything to them. They just came to understand that you judge people by conduct and you judge people by character.
Sure. You know, we talked earlier about this a little bit. You know, and I remember really why sports, to me, in my opinion, just so special, because it comes to a time where you're in that locker room where these are just your brothers. It doesn't even matter where color, ethnicity, all that stuff, just it goes away on the football team. What do you attribute that to? What do you think?
Well, I think it's attributed to just the simple fact is you get to know people. That's all. You get to know people. When you get to know people and you it opens up your mind, and I think it's nothing more than that.
In football, you really get to know these guys. I mean, and that's what makes the sport so special, right? You're spending almost every minute of the day with these guys.
Exactly.
But I think even more so you're sweating with them, you're bleeding with them, you're in agony with them at times, right? And it's during those hardships where nothing is more revealing of character, right? When you're going through a hardship or you're trying to get over something as a team, right?
Exactly, and of course it's not just that. The same things happen just at universities. People come from all over the country to come to the university, and they see the same thing in their classroom. They see that people of color are just as bright as they are, just as personable, that have the same values.
So let's talk about the game where some of the guys walked out. They were boycotting, right? Some of the black guys on the team just walked out, said, "Hey, we're going to boycott this game." Tell me about the environment. You were in New Orleans at the time?
Yeah, it was the New Orleans. There's an all-star game in New Orleans. I think it was 1965. Okay. And at that time, we would all arrive from different parts, from all over the country. And we were given itineraries, and one of the itineraries was that the next morning we would all get on the bus and go to the first practice. And so we were on the bus, and the coach was taking roll call, and the coach would call out names like Bobby Bell, and no answer. Earl Faison, no answer. Ernie Ladd, no answer. And finally, the coach said he didn't get the significance that he was calling out black names and no answer. Right. And he said, "Where is everybody?" And then somebody from the back of the bus said, "All the black guys in the meeting room, they're talking about boycotting the game." And the coach said, "Why?" And the guy said, "Oh, they said we've been mistreated in this city." Well, New Orleans was a segregated city at that time.
So hard to believe. Yeah, so hard to believe.
And so I got off the bus and went to join the meeting. I was the only white guy to get off and join the meeting, and Cookie Gilchrist seemed to be running the meeting at the time, and I asked him, I said, what has happened? And he said most of the guys couldn't get cabs. He said, then we went to restaurants, we were turned away. He said 3 of the guys were turned away at gunpoint. He said, and then we get to the hotel, and they ask us to enter through the back door. And I said, well, wouldn't it be better if we just stayed here and called national attention to what was going on in the city? And Cookie said, no, it's time we actually took a stand. He said that will bring the national attention. We're going to boycott the game. Now, what you have to understand is these all-star games were very important to the players from an economic standpoint. We made very little money in those days, very little. And so if you could pick up an extra, and it was really very modest. I think the winner got $800, the loser team got $600. It was like important to you.
Yeah.
So it was a giant step to boycott the game. And I said, okay. I said, if you're going, I'll go with you. Now, and then the coaches were alerted, and the game then was moved to Houston. It was moved to Houston that week. And I say this I was the only white player to get off the bus and actually join the meeting. But I'll say this to the credit of all the white players. I didn't hear one dissenting voice from them saying something derogatory about the black players for causing the game to move. Not one. I mean, they all had an understanding.
Yeah, it's unique. I mean, it was a different time, right? In America, it's almost hard for me to picture that.
The major point of it all, besides the courageous stand, was that caused the city to desegregate. New Orleans wanted an NFL team. They knew then they were not going to get one unless they desegregated the city, and the city council in a very short time after that desegregated. So a group of athletes, by taking this bold stand, created a history that benefited millions and millions. I don't mean just people in Louisiana. I mean, and look how with great pride the black community throughout the United States must have taken in what these players did.
And I think that from a player standpoint, we often lose sight of what a uniquely powerful platform we have at times for change. And looking back over history, obviously from football to baseball to other sports, of how that's things like this impacting communities, impacting the nation for change, for good, for better, right? What a uniquely cool story. I love it.
There's a Jewish directive called Tikkun Olam. Tikkun Olam. And it just means that we're all directed to try to heal the world, and we do. We have to try to make this a better place, and then I get too much credit. I get too much credit for these acts because there's just thousands and millions of people who do the same thing in their own communities, and no special attention is ever given to them. Right. But it's still important. I understand that it is important to give a public figure attention because I think it's important that then it spreads the support and people know that there's other people that agree with them.
Ron, you're exactly right. I think the fact that you're standing up for these things, and I realize the great humility that you have too, which is incredible. For today's players, there's a lot of injustices going on in the world. For today's players, if you could send them a message about the injustices, there's lots going on right now. Of course, we have Kaepernick and everything that he's done and the good and bad of it. What would your message be to today's players?
You know what? I'm very impressed by today's players. They really, as a group, seem to have a good social conscience, speaking out regularly on social injustices. I think it's an excellent, intelligent, well-educated group of players, and just tell them to keep doing it. And by the way, from a selfish interest, my current player friends, don't forget the pre-93 players. Their pensions are horrible. 4 times they went out on strikes that resulted in the climate today that allows you to become multi-millionaires. And many of them are just struggling. So this next collective bargaining agreement, do something with them. Raise their pensions. It's important.
Yeah. Matter of fact, I just talked to a gentleman who played for the Bears back in the I'm going to say mid-'60s, late 60s, and these very issues, like just how poor the pension is, and how, of course, introducing him to the PFRPA because he had some issues with his eyes. But you're absolutely right. Today's players need to focus on these pre-93 players and do something about this atrocious pension and get this fixed once and for all. We've been talking about it now for how many years? And that we're going to get this fixed and we're going to push hard on this.
Only 40 years.
Yeah. It's time. It's time, fellas. Let's take the vote to them.
That's right. And don't stop your social actions. Don't stop them.
Yeah.
But also look to your own house and let's take care of those older guys.
Absolutely right. Let's take care of our own house and our own people. And it's easy for folks to not remember the guys that are the foundation of this game. And you're right, absolutely right. Given the salaries that they have today, we have to do something about it. So anyways, Ron, Super Bowl week, this is fantastic. Thanks for hanging out with us today. Always amazing talking to you. We have always have such a wide range of things that we talk about, which I love. So thanks for hanging out with us today.
Well, you're just doing frankly, if I may return the compliment, you're doing a great service to not only the athletic community, but America as a whole by having the type of interviews you have and letting people out there see that the athletes do care about things other than just themselves. They're not a group of selfish people. I've found, and I've known thousands of athletes because I'm no longer a practicing attorney, but my law practice was representing retired professional athletes in workers' comp claims and probably represented over 2,000. And I can tell you and the audience that easily about 98% of them are high-quality, good people. They should be proud of the players that are in their community because they're good people.
Right, absolutely. Well, Ron, I appreciate it. Thank you. And
thank you.
We'll talk down the road.
Good.
Thanks, brother.
Thank you.